Thank you, George. It's so nice to be introduced by you. And it's really good to be back with you all at Sangha Live. And you see some familiar faces and also quite a bit of people that I don't know. And one of the things I'd love to do is to call even shorter periods of meditation a retreat. Because as George was saying, you are retreating from maybe all kinds of daily activities. And one way to frame that experience is for me, it's like it's a sacred pause. And on this sacred pause, I look forward to reflecting with you on what makes mindfulness wise. It's often said that wise mindfulness, it will protect you. And in our little mini retreat, I'd love to unpack with you what allows mindfulness for you to be supportive. Because there's something special about it. It can know all the good things in our lives and in our minds, and it will help you grow it happily. But this awareness of ours can also know the difficult and can support us holding it carefully. So that's what we're looking into today in our session, in our mini retreat. And in the guided meditation, I'd like to suggest two questions. The first question is, what is this? The second question I'll kind of keep asking you is, how does it feel? But for now, first, I want to invite you to check how your body is. Maybe stretch it, move it, orient yourself in the space you're in. Taking some time to coming into a meditation posture that works for you in this moment. It's as if you're letting the body know time for a pause. And perhaps you like to close your eyes or have a soft gaze. Just asking yourself, is there awareness? You don't need to make yourself mindful. It's just remembering, and then it's already here. I am aware. It's quite magical. Its quality is to know. You can know how the body is in this moment. Can you feel its aliveness? Feeling it. Awareness can do that as well. Allow you to feel. Maybe the sense of touch the body is making, a chair, a cushion, floor. knowing there's touching, but also knowing how it feels. You might also notice some tension in the body. Is it okay to soften or relax? You're letting the shoulders hang down, just leaning a little more backwards. Maybe letting the belly be soft. The body is alive. Taking a moment to familiarize yourself with how the body breathes. Need some energy. Maybe on the next in breath, just hold the breath for a few moments before you release. Feeling the release, the out breath. The ground awareness even more. You also explore that moment when you're about to breathe in, to not yet breathe in. Just allowing the lungs to empty and pause before breathing in. This slight holding for breathing in and before breathing out. You'd like to just find a natural rhythm, allowing the body breathe on its own, feeling that movement. Whenever you're ready, also exploring other experiences that might call for your attention. It might be sounds, thinking, planning. What happens if you ask, what is this? You might recognize sleepiness, feeling distracted, and then take some time to feel into it. How the sleepiness might feel in the body, or you feeling concentrated. Knowing you can always come home to knowing your body breathe. And take your time. You are on retreat. What is this experience right now? You recognize it. How does it feel? Can you get a felt sense of this experience beyond words? To make yourself mindful. The remembering is enough. How does it feel to be aware? Does it feel like a protection? You're learning something. This simple yet profound activity to pause and know it's like this right now. Why is mindfulness? the few moments you will hear me ring the bell, just notice that moment of transition where you might become more aware of your surroundings and maybe moving the body a little bit. And see if you can stay curious and interested to know what it's like. Practice. What I'd love to do in the Dharma talk is to explore elements of what makes mindfulness wise mindfulness. Now, what kind of learning can happen from this simple yet profound paying attention to your present moment's experience, with the sense of curiosity, the sense of care, but also kind of a courageous willingness to be with it. And I thought it might be helpful to start first with sharing that in the Buddha's language, in the Pali language, mindfulness is referred to as sati, S-A-T-I, and that a great element of the meaning of that word is to remember. I think that's a really important thing, to realize that all that's needed to be aware is to remember it. So in a way, you could say our meditation practice is about remembering to be aware of our present moment's experience with kindness and this willingness to be with it, because it's not always easy. And then I found out that in English, and I'm aware that it's not, you're not just a crowd of English speaking people, but in English, very often, mindfulness is referred to as knowing, just the knowing of a mind state, or the knowing that you have a bodily sensation, the knowing. And I just wanted to kind of invite you to play also maybe in your own language, like that experience of being mindful. How would you name it? At first, I had to get used to the knowing, but I kind of start to like it. And the Buddha actually suggested in his kind of definition of wise mindfulness 4 areas to really know, to really pay attention to. And I'll go over them briefly because I think it's helpful to kind of keep hearing those basic teachings over and over again. And the first area the Buddha said to know of, to be aware of, is the fact that we are embodied. Maybe just right now, just gonna see if you can feel body sensations. Or maybe just noticing that you have a body. You knowing how the body is breathing. Second area the Buddha often suggested also to know or to be aware of is how experiences feel. I want to invite you into an experiment, and as always, everything is a suggestion, but see if you can start rubbing your hands and slowly pick up the speed and add a little pressure. And then see if you can actually feel it. And we feel, in my case, the heat coming up. Feeling that. Is it pleasant? Unpleasant? Well, neither. And then slowing down. Now see if you can come home to the body again. You might notice the effect of doing that or witnessing a few people on the screen. How an experience actually feels is another area of wise mindfulness. Third area that Buddha suggested is to know or be aware of everything going on in this space called mind. In my community, we had a guest teacher, her name was Pilar, and she said, "Isn't that the most precious thing we have, a mind?" And she placed her hand on her heart. Because in so many Southeastern languages in Asia, in Southeast Asia, the word for mind and heart are the same. This knowing, this special awareness, it can know what's going on in that space. We just pause right now. Does your mind feel spacious or closed? Does it feel focused or distracted? Lots of thoughts, few thoughts? We can know this, recognize it. We can even know that we're not sure what our mind state is. Oh, I'm not sure. It feels like this. And then the fourth area to direct your mindfulness, to be aware of, is what the Buddha called mindfulness of phenomena, which kind of sounds a little cryptic and weird in English. But it's, for example, noticing experiences like the flow of change. You should kind of notice the sounds around you, just the flow of your body breathing. In this area, when we're mindful, we might also make connections. You might see that when we really are very possessive, we suffer. And then sometimes a moment when a release comes, we feel lighter. These types of experiences can be recognized by mindfulness. And sometimes these four areas are called the four foundations of wise mindfulness. Because the more we practice knowing what's going on in the body, how it feels in the mind, making connections, the wiser we become. And I kind of like to make this analogy with playing an instrument. I'm looking at my electric guitar, and I'm noticing that the more I can play it, the more I can express myself through it. And it's a whole new experience because at first I could only play a few simple Beatles songs, but now I'm also making my own music. And I think it's the same way with this instrument of mindfulness. And it reminded me to reflect how would I express myself if I would be mindful full time? Just think about it. How would you express yourself if you'd be mindful all the time? And that's actually the definition of the Buddha by Thich Nhat Hanh, that famous Zen teacher. You'd say a Buddha is someone who is aware all day long. How would you engage with the world, with yourself? I was kind of reflecting on myself, and I think I'd be more patient. I think I might be way more attuned to the needs of others if I was mindful full time. But Thich Nhat Hanh also said, we are only part-time Buddhas. We often forget to be really present. And that's why in that word sati, it points to the importance of remembering. Wise mindfulness has a willingness in it for us to keep remembering over and over again. So this is maybe one of the encouragements I'd love to put out there, is to invite you to keep remembering. That's where the effort really is in, not so much having to create mindfulness. And my favorite meditation instruction is pause. You just pause right now and you'll be aware, or you'll notice you've been aware. It's actually quite practical. It's wise mindfulness. Quite simple, but we overlook it so easily. So really the essence of wise mindfulness is this repeated and ongoing pausing. Because what it does, it'll teach us a lot. It'll bring insight. That's why in this tradition we refer to meditation often as insight meditation. I want to share maybe the most powerful insights the Buddha kept sharing with his community. And the setting is when he's about to pass away. It's from a sutta called The Last Days of the Buddha. It said that he was suffering from intense food poisoning. That was the cause of his death. But then on his deathbed, what the disciple saw was someone who was physically uncomfortable with a calm and serene mind, which is already to me is such an inspiring image. But it said that several times, I think 3 times, the Buddha asked, is everything clear? Do you have any more questions? And his disciple said, no, Venerable Sir. And then part of his last words were in his language, in Pali, anicca vata sankhara. Impermanent are all formations. That was one of the key insights the Buddha got. Paying attention moment to moment to remember. Impermanent are all formations. And now I live in Harlem, but I used to live in the Bronx, and I would visit a Cambodia temple quite often because it was near our house. And the monks would always chant a chant where that line was part of it too. Anicca vata sankhara. And I think even right now in this very moment, somewhere in a Buddhist community, it might be chanted, because it's also used as part of a funeral chant. And the Buddha had a huge insight into that word, not just impermanence, anicca, but also that other word, sankhara. And I've kind of translated following great translators as formations. But to me, that doesn't really, resonate so much. Some translators call it constructions. That doesn't really resonate either. But what it essentially is that all things in the material world are sankhara, and all things in the mental world are sankharas too. So an electric guitar, sankhara. A person is a sankhara. A building, the wide blossom outside on the avenue. A pigeon, fear, pain, loss, all sankharas, grief, opinions, even consciousness is a sankhara. So if you pause right now and ask yourself, what is this experience? What you're knowing is a sankhara. Great translator Bhikkhu Bodhi, he writes that sankhara is about together and doing. He calls them co-doings because the key insight the Buddha had was that all things, all experiences are created because of causes and conditions. In nature, nothing exists alone. No thing, no experience is separate. Even the great mother of all sankharas, the sense of self, is not separate. And, I'm not sharing something completely new. We know this to some extent on an intellectual level. But with the practice of wise mindfulness, we get a way more an intimate understanding that all sankhara are impermanent. And actually, that funeral chant I was talking about, the next line after anicca vata sankhara in English is, to live in harmony with this truth brings the greatest peace. To live in harmony with the truth that all sankhara come and go brings the greatest peace. And that's exactly why the Buddha started to teach, and inviting us into that seemingly simple remembering what it's like right now. But the Buddha had another huge, powerful insight, life-changing, through the practice of wise mindfulness. It allowed him also to realize, I'm throwing a lot of Pali at you today, I'm sorry. It helped him to realize nibbana, in Sanskrit, nirvana. And nirvana, nibbana, is not a sankhara. It's also not conditioned by sankhara. So the Buddha realized something that is empty of all this sankhara. In his language, it was called visankhara, empty of sankhara. Of course, and he said that many times, it's really hard to describe this realization. But for me, it's been helpful to really kind of reflect on sankhara and then, empty of that. And one scholar said, the realization of nibbana is like, nibbana is. Simply is. And realizing that is deeply freeing. And a key part of what the Buddha called this path to awakening. I think awakening could be another word for like mindfulness. And I've been using mindfulness and awareness, how you say, synonymously. Because every time we pause and remember to be aware, it's as if we're waking up from being lost in, most of the times, thoughts, sankharas, right? There. I'm just looking through my notes and it's kind of embarrassing. I was once on a quite long meditation retreat, a residential retreat, and I wasn't really aware that I was so lost in my thoughts. But maybe for like 45 minutes, I created in my mind a whole outline for a book that I should write as a Dharma teacher. I even had a name for it. You're Never Too Late for the Present Moment by Bart van Melik. And it was just so interesting to see myself wake up from that. Because that's how, remembering might feel like from time to time. You just, oh yeah, awareness. I was lost. And likewise, we get lost in a lot of habitual behavioral sankharas. Like, I'll be honest again, I sometimes eat in front of Netflix or a screen. I'm not that mindful while eating. And I recently also realized I'm not that mindful while peeing, another habitual thing I do. So for the last couple of weeks, I've been really mindful when I go to the bathroom, not distracting myself with whatever I take with me. And even we can get a sense of when we pause, uh, when we're lost in habitual relational sankharas. Like I have the great privilege to raise someone who's 11. But when I have in my mind already what I'm going to tell my son Lou, I'm not really paying attention to what he's saying. And my least mindful place is an airport. Then the sankharas of restlessness and am I going to make it are so strong. I get lost in the stories the mind keeps saying. But every time, man, when you wake up from being lost, know that the practice is working. Instead of kind of going, not mindful at all, that waking up, that is really at the heart of wise mindfulness. Please pause for a moment. I've been speaking for a while. What is this? And how does it feel? I love to kind of from time to time ask myself, I've learned it from my teacher, from Joseph Goldstein, to ask, what am I learning from being mindful right now? It actually heightens a sense of curiosity to keep paying attention. What am I learning from eating mindfully, peeing mindfully, listening mindfully? And I think that we also learn a lot when we are um, mindful together. And I want to kind of share one of my favorite stories with you. Um, and this happened in a high school downtown on 14th Street here in Manhattan. And I had to teach a group of 16-year-olds for a whole year, 3 times a week, teaching them mindfulness. It was part of their physical education. And that school had like a very liberal policy when it comes to like cell phones. And so I often had to fight the kids, put the cell phone away and all that stuff. And they were also very open to admit that it's a great source of addiction. And so one afternoon, and I always had them after lunch, one afternoon, I asked everyone to bring their phone and we put a yoga mat out and everyone put their phones on the yoga mat. And my meditation instructions were really simple. Just sit, know you're sitting, but also be aware of your surroundings, keeping your eyes open and just look at that pile of 30 plus phones. And in the beginning, it was really silent. Everyone seemed focused. But then the first started, and I could feel in my own body a leaning forward towards the mat. It felt like it could be my phone, like a physical pull. And then more phones started going, some started to blink. And also the vibe in the room started to change. The vibe in the room became more restless. And we were all looking around a little bit and it felt super uncomfortable. And then there was Stephanie. She just lost it in a way. She kept looking around, made all these gestures. And all of a sudden she said, the hell with it. And she actually stood up, went to the yoga mat, picked up her phone, thinking that she would have a message. And it wasn't. It wasn't even for her. And then we unpacked that experience together as we were mindfully learning together. And we learned how this wanting for input leads to so much stress. And that's maybe the most important insight into how sankharas operated the Buddha had ever seen. He called that the second noble truth. This wanting or just not wanting, leading to so much unnecessary stress. Then another thing I'd like to share, and this is really helpful in the actual practice. I don't know if you've ever had an experience where you really want to know why. Why am I not over this? Why am I feeling this way? Why is the practice not working? Why am I feeling so miserable? I mean, I could go on and on. That's not a really helpful reflection most of the times in the practice of wise mindfulness, because it's very easy to kind of get lost in thought sankhara. So when you notice that sense of wanting to know why, recognize it. Oh, here's wanting to figure out or wanting to manage this through my mind. Feels like this. So instead of asking why, see if you can ask what. What is this? Wise mindfulness is about knowing what may be the content of this experience that I'm having, or wise mindfulness can know this other person is having this particular experience. We can know when someone is sad or angry, even with animals. We can even know the vibe in the room, as we really noticed in that high school, especially when Stephanie got up. And in this way, wise mindfulness, I think, can protect us. Just by knowing what is this. It might stop us from keep engaging in an habitual way that might just lead to more stress. And I remember I had this key insight when I was paying attention to a lot of worry and fear. And I realized that The part of me that is aware of fear is not afraid. It just knows. That's its nature. Awareness is not what it knows or feels. And then I started to apply this also with mixed success, especially in raising someone who's 11. My biggest challenge in life right now is when I'm angry. Really noticing, oh, being upset is here. And to remember that insight. Is that true? That the knowing of this is not angry. So in that way, wise mindfulness can protect too. It could create some space because it knows. And then another key thing, and I'm love to invite also hearing from you in just a moment. Besides checking when you go into why, they only ask what. The second question you can ask is, how does it feel? Remember, some of us rubbed our hands. It becomes really interesting to also, for example, really feel the body breathe. Or really feeling the aliveness of the body, and or feel when you are petting a pet. You see in Nancy's screen, being there, feeling it. That part of wise mindfulness sometimes is called bare attention. And that is so helpful. If you practice really how things feel more often, you now know a way to kind of also maybe move a little bit away from all the content and actually feel. So that you let there be in the hearing simply the hearing. I don't know if you've heard, but I live on a busy avenue. Thank God for noise canceling Zoom. But it makes such a difference when I hear just the sounds in and of themselves. Or comparing to, oh, I hope you all are not hearing this. And I start to really kind of get all upset about sounds. It's different. So sometimes wise mindfulness practice can go to that question, how does it feel? Especially when it comes to attuning to that level of the felt sense. I think that's what Martin also often says, the felt sense. Then we can start to see that flow of sankharas again. Impermanent are all sankharas. It's impossible right now to hold on to a sound, even if you would try to. If you're no longer struggling with that, just allow it. That's a release or a letting go. And also to realize when you release, you see that you're no longer doing that particular habitual thing anymore. That's what the Buddha called that fourth area where you start to see connection. And your mindfulness is supported by wisdom. Mindfulness will protect you as long as you remember it. It can feel and know the good and will support you to grow it happily. And it can feel and know the difficult and will support you to hold it carefully. What a gift. So I'd like to pause and thanking you for your kind attention. And if you like, maybe reflect with us kind of as an act of generosity. How has mindfulness been protecting you? Or what have you learned from paying attention, from being aware. And how would you express yourself if you were mindful full time? Or anything else that you might like to share would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. Bartolome. Cool name, by the way. Feel invited if I pronounce it rightly.
Hi, Bart.
Hey,
Hi, nice to meet you.
guys.
Yeah, I like your two questions. It's just they cutting right to the source, like what is this and how does it feel, in the body? And this is exactly what I was working, for the past few years, with just trying to be present. Yeah, and those questions, they're quite accurate. They just like the reset button, I would say, for whatever is happening, any drama in the mind, and that's those questions, they're just clearly knowing, that's right there. You see this what's happening, and that's amazing. That's beautiful, just remember those two questions. And yeah, I totally appreciate this quality of knowing, and this is such a relief, I think, for me, in my experience, to just see what is happening and how I'm relating to it. And even sometimes it's not pleasant, but it's still better to see that than not to see, of course, than just being lost. So yeah, I kind of do appreciate this quality. And yeah, you mentioned that Buddha realized nirvana and this emptiness. Can you tell us more about that? What exactly that he saw that he um, attain this liberation? And from your experience, what brings also this quality of nirvana in your daily life? Can you tell us a bit more about that, please, Bart? That'd be great.
And thanks for your sharing. It's inspiring to hear.
Thank you.
I think that there's something that the Buddha, I'll throw another Pali word in here, which the Buddha used, and that is dukkha.
Mm.
And he not only taught us that all these sankharas are impermanent, he also referred to them as dukkha. And that might sound strange because most of us, are brought up with the translation of dukkha being stress or stressful or painful. And that's
Mhm.
dukkha. But it's also dukkha that things are impermanent. With our Sangha today, we were reflecting on death and the inevitability of it, not knowing when or how it happens, knowing that we will lose our dear ones and all that we hold dearly. The Buddha said, there's the noble truth of dukkha. And it's because of the world we're living in, there are sankharas. But I think that was really liberating was this realization that, yes, there is all these sankharas and there is dukkha, and there is the end of dukkha that can be realized not just in a moment of release, when we're just okay with the sankhara, but also with this very powerful realization that And now I'm going to use words that, might don't really describe the experience, that there's something that simply is, holding it all, that doesn't change. It's not impermanent, and yet it's empty of all these sankharas. Buddha sometimes refer to it as the island, the unconstructed, not being created. And that realization was extremely empowering, because it felt like that there was an ending then of that experience of dukkha. And to tap into something that simply is. And I think this has also been pointed at through many other wisdom traditions. It has something freeing, makes it your perspective way bigger. And that's how it's been helpful for me when I remember that, Bartolome,
Mm.
connect to that sense of what is. Yeah. If that makes sense in a nutshell.
It does. Yeah, thank you very much, Bart. That's very helpful. And again, thank you.
Hmm.
There's a question or a couple of questions in the chat, but
Oh.
I can read them, or you can.
Yeah, if you don't mind reading them, George. Oh, yeah.
So, question from PB. So, the Brahma Viharas, love, compassion, etc., are also fabricated sankhara? Are they less fabricated than negative emotions?
I love that question, TB, and thanks for catching that, George. I didn't see the chat. I don't think so. I think they're just as fabricated. What also kind of gives me that sense of freedom is when I realize everything in nature is connected. In nature, nothing stands alone. And maybe just pause and maybe go to the first one, kindness. Your experience, maybe even kind of see if you can invite yourself into that mind state. Maybe by thinking of someone you hold dearly or a being. Or maybe it's kind of here right now, you feel quite kind. That experience had many causes and conditions. I think also likewise with just to start to learn and see and appreciate when we're happy for other people, or when we feel very balanced, or in English, what they say sometimes is equanimous, or when we see suffering and we want to help. For it to arise, it needs some conditions. Just like, how did you say that, PB? Like more negative emotions like anger, or kind of the opposite. The opposite of kindness may be cruelty, but it's the opposite of compassion. Or jealousy, the opposite of really being happy for other people. You know what my favorite word is for the opposite of equanimity? Discombobulated. It's one of my favorite words in English, where you're kind of all over the place, not grounded. It's actually really helpful. And that's what mindfulness can do too, when you're can have more continuity of it, you start to see that, oh yeah, because of this, that arises. If that's not here, this won't arise. So I think they're also fabricated. That would be my answer to your question, PB.
There's another question now from Darshna. Are there any specific resources on mindfulness for new parents who are looking to manage the stress of managing a lot of changes and learning on parenthood?
Oh, Marsha, let me just go respecting, all people who, have to take care of other beings, whether it's a child, maybe you're taking care of a sibling or a cat. But parenthood, for me, it's, a lot of learning still happening. And I used to, one resource you could look at is the online IMS offering. I think my dear friend Carl Lai, and I've also offered something with her sometimes. We create sanghas for parents to come together. It's just another affinity group, as we call them sometimes in the meditation world. Because I think what I've learned the most from being in community, whether it was with the high school kids, just really seeing how we're addicted to our phones. There's a lot of learning can happen, especially when we're noticing I am not alone. And so in our group at the time, so please look up IMS online, Darshan. In that group, what really stood out was that we all make mistakes. And that was huge for me, to be able to say that out loud and to hear that from other people. And then eventually it made me even way more milder to my parents. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Okay, so Lawrence, can you connect this to dependent origination?
I'm getting all the difficult questions today. And I try to be
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Yes, Lawrence, I can. And I must say, for those of you, this is the most maybe difficult teaching in the Buddhist teachings. That's called dependent origination, because some of you might know, what is this? And the Buddha had a cousin, and he was also his attendant, and his name was Ananda. And, when you start reading these ancient texts, you start to love Ananda. And Ananda, he once told the Buddha, oh, that everything kind of it's created because of conditions. That is so simple, right? And the Buddha said, don't say that, Ananda. It's not that simple. So that's kind of my introduction to answering your question, Lawrence. But basically what it comes down to is that an experience, a sankhara that we're having, can only arise because of specific conditions. So, for example, if my son is brushing his teeth again on the couch, which I ask him not to do, that condition might, that cause might condition in me a sense of judgment, judging him, And then in the Buddhist language, it would say, because of this, him brushing the teeth on the couch, my anger arises. But sometimes things also arise at the same time. And then it gets a little more complicated. But for example, when I'm angry, I can know the anger or judging him At the same time, I can actually feel the heat in my body. So those are co-arising in that moment. And the Buddha made this point to his nephew, an attendant, Ananda. He said, when you really see the conditioned nature of all these sankharas, you see my teachings. So in that sense, Lawrence, that the question makes total sense, that there's a connection between that teaching. Because eventually the Buddha says that our suffering is also conditioned. And then through a lot of insight into how our psychology works, he starts to realize that what are the elements that lead to suffering and what are the elements that lead to the end of it. Oh, and actually, I see your hand up. Oh, great. That's you, right, Lawrence? Yes, please feel invited to unmute.
So the one that I thought was the aspect that's especially interesting for me, thinking about kindness in the flow of dependent origination and how it's not one thing, like the Brahma Viharas, kindness. It's not just one dimensional. It's in the flow of dependent origination, and it's so complicated as far as the many aspects of my mind states and intention and my conditioning and craving and clinging and how it's going to be received, and your whole craving, clinging, conditioning, just that's what came up for me.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And then sometimes I notice when I'm really studying these teachings or any other wisdom teachings or poetry sometimes, notice when, I mean, for me, then I have this sense sometimes of wanting to figure it all out. And then instead of really getting lost in that, sometimes it's really helpful again to simply ask, what is this? And then I actually recognize, and I say that to myself, oh, wanting to figure it out. Sometimes I want to manage it through my mind. And as soon as I go, what? And then feel that again, there might be also an insight into a wanting to figure it out, the craving again. And allow myself to feel that. And I was recently on retreat, and one of my biggest insights I had, Lawrence, was, and I had this in Dutch, so I'm going to have to translate it in my head. Searching doesn't make so much sense. Finding does. And for some reason, that shifted something in me. And it allowed actually for a way more clear seeing of the flow of conditions. Searching doesn't make so much sense. Finding does. And just interesting that that comes up because of what you said, Lawrence. So even this dialogue we're having is conditioned. And I appreciate you bringing that up. And I hope it was helpful.
I quickly have to say to you that story about the high school is spectacular, that you had them leave the phones on. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
How did you, if there are not too many questions, you can save it if there's time at the end, but how did you get them to be so advanced that they would let you leave them on there? That's amazing. So maybe take some other questions, but I just have to say, deep bow on that. That's beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that. That warms my heart. It was actually quite simple to answer your question because I saw them 3 times a week for a whole 2 semesters. It was that sense of becoming familiar with remembering awareness for them too. And especially when more or less everyone got into it, we started to realize that remembering to be aware sometimes is easier in community. And that's why I think it's so special that Sangha Life has been being able to offer that for 10 years. Because once the Buddha was asked by monks, they said, Venerable Sir, we end up in a lot of debates with other monastics from other sects. And they ask us always, like, what are the prerequisites for this awakening that your teacher is proclaiming? You know what the Buddha said? The first prerequisite is friendship. To develop this eightfold path, these wings to awakening. And that's another kind of like insight I want to keep at the front of my own practice, that I don't have to do all this remembering alone. And because they did that in a group for a while, Lawrence, this was in May after we started in September, everyone was down to do it. Yeah. Thank you for your reflection. And good people, I'm also aware of the time. I want to respect your time. So just to see if there's one more thing that might want to be said before we close.
Just because I'm curious too, Sheila just kept on this thread and asked, were the students in your class willing or able to see the value in managing the distraction of phones in their lives?
Absolutely.
Great.
Because we made it practical, because we actually reflected a lot on what do I learn when I catch myself being distracted. And one thing that you learn from when you keep catching yourself being distracted, that it's actually quite suffering. And that the movement towards this distraction, which for the kids often is towards the phone, and for me too, to be honest, is because there's something maybe a little boring or unpleasant going on. And what is the habitual sankhara? Is to look for pleasure, is to pick up the phone. And what we actually ended up also being okay with everyone not using their phone for a whole session. So I think there's a lot of learning that can happen when we keep waking up from being lost in habitual energies. And I think there a lot of learning is happening. And that happened in that community that I was so grateful for to be part of. It was not easy, but yeah. Anyway, I'm aware of the time, and I also want to honor that, right, George? Before closing, I'd love to invite you, if you ever have time, to come to our online Sangha. It won't interfere with La Sangha Live. It's to the Community Meditation Center, as George was saying. It's the New York time from 10:30 to 12. You're always welcome. And I think George is also sharing other helpful links also to support Sangha Live. But George, do you think it's a good idea, if there's anything that you want to say before we close, and then we close?
Just to thank you. I'm seeing that Brad had a question for me. Donations from those buttons benefit the teachers. Recording is shown on the page. I might briefly just answer that because we've been speaking about this. The way we work with donations is on this session until midnight UK time, whatever you donate now is shared with Bart. And that happens with all the sessions that are live. When you see a recording, well, what happens is we don't have enough staff and software to just allocate. Let's say, if you're listening to a talk from another teacher that went some time ago, and you would love to have that teacher having a donation. Well, that was a recording. If you donate on that moment, the donation will be shared with the ongoing teacher of that week or of that day, not specifically that one. We don't have the means to do that. So if you listen to some teacher and you would love to donate, I would suggest looking up that teacher's page. Maybe there's some way to donate something to him, or wait for another session where you will be with us and then donate on that session or on that week if it's on the morning sessions. I hope this has answered your question. And apart from that, Bart, I just want to thank you for this wonderful session. It was really, like I think Harry said, it was very grounding. You had a lot of difficult questions, but you had a very difficult topic. So yeah, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you. And I want to thank you all as well. And you specifically, George. And I love ringing bells. So if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to ring a bell 3 more times before we close. And but maybe just pause for a moment. What is this? And just see if you recognize maybe a familiar pattern of, oh, I'm about to click leave meeting. And how does this experience feel? And may our time together be a cause and condition for inner and outer peace. May there be peace. May there be peace. May all beings be liberated.